Greetings to those who listen to Midnight Radio. Tonight, we will tell you the second edition of the dark story behind Chucko the Clown. I'll tell you the part. This will be the finale for this story of ours. Go to bed and enjoy the breathless story. Have a nice listening. Dreadful Past, the dark tale behind Chucko the Clown. Episode #2. I live in a retirement community now, a gated community. Most of my days are spent on the golf course or babysitting my young grandchildren. We're talking nearly 50 years since I was a kid volunteering at the Mayflower. Since then, I'd built a family and they'd built their own. And now I was riding off into the sunset, enjoying the fruits of my labor. But I can't say I ever got past it. I guess I tried. You can try to bury things deep inside, but eventually they come crawling back up in one facet or another, especially the dark stuff. Chucko would come to me occasionally in nightmares. I'd wake up in a deep sweat, his eerie smile flashing in my mind like a faulty neon sign. On those nights, his laugh would haunt me until the early morning when my wife Brenda would welcome me with a warm cup of joe. They were much less frequent these days. One morning before I headed off to the local swimming pool, I saw a package on my front step. It looked like one of those Amazon boxes that Brenda was constantly ordering, so I opened the door and brought it inside. On top, the label read, "Confidential. Attention, Carl Dunnigan." I hadn't ordered anything recently, at least not that I could recall, but my memory wasn't the greatest. So I peeled off the tape and looked inside. What I found sent a cold chill up my spine. My old Polaroid camera, reunited after its strange disappearance that fretful night at the Mayflower House. I stood frozen, unsure of what to make of the parcel. At the bottom, I could see the white border of a photo tucked underneath. The picture looked like it had been taken by accident, a blur of mossy green with the silhouette of someone in the shadows. It was so hard to tell, abstract. When I flipped the photo over, my stomach twisted in knots. Howdy, Carl. One last photo shoot for good old Chuck, for old time's sake. At the bottom were a series of numbers, what I believed to be GPS coordinates. See you tonight. Word didn't travel back then as fast as it does now. That's the only way that I can explain it. I'm still trying to understand how, after all that, the man was able to walk free. That's a question for the authorities, not me. I don't believe he had been formally charged with anything at that point. Just a creepy son of a bitch, someone you definitely don't want around your kids. But he did. He walked. He even performed again. I don't recall how many days after my last encounter with him at the Mayflower House, but it couldn't have been any longer than a couple of weeks. It was a grave mishap, an unforgivable lapse of communication that came with devastating consequences. Apparently, he had shown up for another gig at another children's hospice in a neighboring city. They weren't made aware of the prior incident, at least that's what the manager had claimed. But he had shown up and put in an honest day of work. Families and hospital staff reported that everything seemed normal. It wasn't the first time he had been scheduled there, and the kids were overjoyed to see him. It wasn't until the following morning, when the nurses made their rounds, that they found the kids missing. 3 in total vanished from their bedrooms in the middle of the night. The parents were beyond distraught, and the manhunt for Chucko the Clown had kicked off in full swing. Did he convince the kids to follow him? Had he forced them against their will? The search went on for months. Months turned into years. Eventually, it faded into the background of other larger news stories at the time. The campus killer was on the loose, which captivated America. The war in Vietnam was ending. There were things that were just a bigger priority to the world. But I always wondered about the parents and what they must have gone through. Having a dying child is one thing, but to never know what happened to them is another. And to never know what happened to the one who took them is an entirely separate level of suffering. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. It was a long drive out into the country. I parked my car at the edge of the highway, where I believed the nearest entry point would be. From there, Google Maps showed the floating dot up ahead, into the vast wilderness of pine trees. There was a small fence I would have to hurdle, likely to keep the wildlife out, and I would be going in. I wasn't the greatest with this level of technology, but it did sure look like a lot of walking for a man of my age. A lot of walking for old Chuck, too. He had to have been in his 70s now, I figured, and he was never in the greatest of shape from what I could remember. Looking back, it was foolish to go alone, but I knew what Chuck could do to my family if I didn't obey. The cops had let him go once. I didn't trust they could hold him again. I left a note on the counter for Brenda. I told her I was going for a hike with some buddies and provided the coordinates. I instructed her to call the police if I didn't return by sundown. I knew it would likely spook her, but I didn't know what else to do. It was quiet in the backwoods, just the crunching of branches and my heavy breathing. I could feel the pounding of my heartbeat reverberating in my skull. The camera was giving me a kink in my neck as it swayed across my chest, the strap rubbing my collar raw. After about an hour of what felt like aimless walking with very few discernible landmarks to guide me home, my phone told me that I was there. I swiveled around to see if I could recognize something, anything other than trees, and then I saw it, hung from a branch, halfway up a thick evergreen. A faded sky blue hospital gown, specks of blood across the chest. Another laid flat over an outcrop of rocks, ripped and tiny, but stained in a deep dark maroon. The last was partially tucked into the hole of an overturned tree trunk. I found myself struggling to breathe. He did it, I thought. I always knew it, deep down. When people go missing for that amount of time, the outcome is always grim. But seeing it all displayed like that in this disturbing arrangement was difficult to process. I wrestled with the thought of what to do next. Head back and go get help? Collect the evidence? Should I even be stepping in this crime scene? And what was this? His confession? To the last person he knew was tied to the case. I kept thinking about me as a child being steps away from a monster for all those months and not even knowing it. The only logical thing I could think of was point my camera and shoot. The mechanical grinding sound of the gears floated through the trees. Flash after flash, the film slowly crept out of the opening. As the last of my film ran out, I focused my gaze on the never-ending surroundings. Chuck? I spoke to the trees. Hello? Come out, Chuck. Chuck. Nothing for a while as I waited for the last photo to develop. And then I could have sworn I heard it, whistling through the trees. I spun myself around, unable to trace where it was coming from. There was rustling off in the distance, but the family of evergreens were thick and crowded out any hope of detection. I hastily trekked back to the vehicle as the sunlight dwindled behind the mountains. A deep orange overtook the slivers of emptiness between the trees. Screaming at the top of my lungs, I shouted, "You're done, Chuck! You're fucking done!" And the laughter seemed to fade away with every step my old tired legs took in haste. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. It was a long wait that evening at the precinct, and an even longer interrogation. The old wily-looking detective thanked me for my photos and listened intently to my story. He appeared to savor long, exaggerated sips of his coffee. "I remember this case," he said. He reached for a powdered donut in a box laid out on the table. He waved it in the air as an offering. I politely declined. "He performed for my sister's kid back in the day," he spoke, mouth open, full of mush. "Real goofy character from what I can remember, but seemed all right at the time. Terrible seeing the kids like that, in pain though, suffering. Just waiting to die like that. He sure put a smile on a lot of their faces." His voice trailed off, examining the camera. "Who woulda knew?" There was another enthusiastic sip, coffee dribbling out of the brim of his cup. Muttering an expletive under his breath, he grabbed a napkin on the table and attempted to blot out the stain on his undersized uniform. I outlined everything about the backstory and the recent return of my camera. When I couldn't think of anything else, he thanked me for my time. 40-some-odd years, huh? He said.
Has it really been that long? Time sure flies. Well, it's never too late to put a guilty bastard away, he stated. He inspected the set of photos inquisitively. Finally, he assured me that investigators had been sent and that they were in the middle of sectioning off the area and collecting the physical evidence. You take care, he said, and if you can think of anything else, please reach out. We shook hands and he passed along his card. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I was welcomed home with a suffocating bear hug from a nervous Brenda. We stood in our foyer holding each other for a long while. I filled her in on my bizarre evening, talking long into the morning.